Hi, welcome to Governance Bites. I'm Mark Banicevich, and today it's a great day to spend at Tony Vidler's head office and look forward to a great conversation. Thank you very much, Tony.
You're welcome, Mark.
So Tony started his career in the Navy and did a number of years in the Australian Navy and has done the last 30 odd years in financial services as an advisor, a business mentor, business advisor, done directors, governance work, all sorts of stuff in the financial advice space. Very knowledgeable man, well known in the New Zealand financial advice industry, and a pleasure to spend time with. So thank you very much for your time, TV.
You are welcome, mate.
Okay, let's start with, our focus today is on governance in small business.
Yeah.
So I want to start with the question, people tend to think of governance as involving a board of directors. So what is governance in small business? Is a board of directors necessary? How does it show differently?
A couple of questions there. What is governance in small business? I tend to describe it this way to people that are starting to learn about, think about whether or not governance is something which could be helpful to them. It's, does the boss have a boss? Yeah. Now, more often than not, when you're looking at smaller businesses in New Zealand, full stop, let alone financial services, you tend to have what I refer to as benevolent dictatorships, right? They mean well, they're trying to do good, they want to look after their staff and all, but fundamentally they're running their own little empire,
right,
and they don't really want anyone else to have any say in it at all. So, the problem with that is that you never know enough about everything you need to know about in order to run your business well, and B, there's no real accountability. There is always a tendency for things to go off the rails when there is no accountability. Yeah. So, I generally would say to people, like, do you as a boss have a boss? Do you have someone that you're answering to that keeps you on the straight and narrow? And that's essentially what governance is about, whatever form that takes. And the form that it takes can vary enormously. I think your second question was, do I need a board of directors? Yeah. It's not so much do I need, it's can I benefit from. If you're running a limited liability company structure, then technically you need to have a board of directors. The Companies Act says so. But that can be a board of one.
Yes.
The real question is, can I benefit from, rather than do I need? And even then, I would suggest that almost invariably, a small business that wants to be a bigger business can benefit from having a board of directors, unquestionably.
Okay, fantastic. We're talking about those benefits. What are the benefits of good governance for a small business?
Accountability would be the number one thing. Accountability. There's additional benefits that go towards creating a more robust business, such as a greater focus on transparency, a greater focus on fairness, a greater focus on diversity. A lot of the topical issues of today, they come from having good oversight and good collective thinking and collective decision making. So they're distinct benefits, but fundamentally it comes down to you tend to get better financial performance. Your business is better, it runs better, it's worth more.
Yes.
From having good oversight and good accountability and transparency. And that to me strikes me as being a fabulous upside.
Absolutely. I wonder whether a lot of that comes from, as well, as you said before, if you're not holding yourself accountable to anybody, then it's very easy to let things slide. But as soon as you say to someone else, I'm going to achieve this, you're really drawing a line in the sand and forcing yourself to do so.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's, to go back to the old, Cortez invading Mexico sort of story, you've burnt your boats on the beach, haven't you? So the minute the words come out of your mouth and you say to Mark, my fellow director, I'm going to do this, it's like, now I'm obliged to, I've actually got to make the effort. I can't just sort of skip it.
Yes.
So more stuff gets done. And probably the more valuable part of the governance in a small business in that example, though, is Mark turning around going, really, is that the best use of your time? That's actually the challenging element, and the ability to think about things from multiple points is where the real upside is, I think.
That was something you alluded to earlier before as well, is you don't know everything. It's a small business owner generally will come into business because they're good at something that isn't business. They're good at plumbing, or they're good at financial advice, or whatever that may be. And so having that extra pair of eyes, that variation experience to bring some other skills and some other ideas to the table is tremendously valuable.
Yeah, one of the management gurus of the 1980s, a guy called Lawrence J. Peter, wrote a number of books and so on, most of which are fabulous. He wrote one that was called The Peter Principle. And the essence of this book was that in any organisation, a person will rise to the level of incompetency. That was fundamentally the essence of the book. And we do see that in institutions,
yes,
but it's also true in very, very small businesses. You get held back by the limits of your knowledge. And of course you don't know what you don't know, so you're unable to assess different options and different paths and different ways forward. And the benefit of having those outsiders is that you do get those different perspectives and you get to weigh up different choices and different options. And it's the ability to weigh up different choices and options that helps guide you down the optimal one.
Right.
Yeah.
What governance processes should a small business have?
That's a great question. When you look, a lot of the time we're dealing with small businesses where it's frequently the spouses of the two directors and things like that. So husband and wife type team often are the directors on paper, and their governance processes largely happen in the bathroom in the morning. While one's brushing their teeth and the other one's in the shower. It's what do you think we should do? And there's no real agenda. There's no real forethought, there's no real planning, there's no real documentation or record keeping that goes with that. So this level of informality is a useful thing if you want to move fast.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you want your business to be going ahead at 100 miles an hour, then a level of informality and a lack of record keeping and agendas and the likes is actually a useful thing. If you want your business to go a long way, I want it to be a much bigger thing and I want it to have some scale and so on and so on, you need extra. You need extra thinking, you need extra skills, you need extra knowledge bases, you need those things, and that's where the level of formality does start to become useful. So the what do you need largely depends on what stage of evolution you're at and what your vision for your business is. Now, to be fair, there's a lot of people in New Zealand that are running small businesses that want them to stay small. They like their lifestyle choice, and that's fine. So what level of governance do they need? Minimal. They've got some obligations under the Companies Act, of course, but don't trade recklessly and make sure you do your annual returns and make sure you keep your records, and that's pretty. Do a solvency thing before you give yourself money. That's about it, right?
For an ongoing business, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's appropriate. In fact, I think the FMA used the word proportional a lot in conversations. They expect governance to be proportional to the size and the focus of the business. So sometimes that informality is absolutely appropriate, but most of the time for most of the small businesses that want to be something other than small, they need to head down the path of starting to formalise and capture their intellectual property and their systems and their processes in order to maximise the value of the business. Yep.
Right. Now, we don't want to scare people off by saying that a small business should have a board of directors and have them think that means 7 or 9 people paid salaries. For a small scale business, your board of directors doesn't have to be large, does it?
Oh God, no. No, in fact it shouldn't be. I think there was plenty of research done by the Institute of Directors years ago about optimal size of boards. And even for a larger organisation, they were suggesting that an optimal size might be somewhere around 7 more often than not. So the idea of having sort of 9 or 10 or 13 people sitting around a board table, I was like, wow. That's certainly not small business space. That's global corporations, that have dealing with 50 different jurisdictions and 40,000 staff, perhaps. Even then, I'd say 12 or 13 might be too many. But in a smaller enterprise, 2 or 3 is more than enough. More than enough. 2 is probably optimal when you're running a smaller business with an executive director, founder. Who's still fundamentally managing the show. Having 2 others is probably enough. It keeps things nice and tight. I think one of the things that came out of that IOD research years ago was for every extra director that you add to the board, you effectively add another hour to each meeting. Right. Yeah, so you want to move fast and you want to be going somewhere. You can't afford to be sitting back there just having talk fest forever, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
As much as you talked before about the agility and things of having a couple of people that can talk on a regular basis, whether they're a couple of partners in the office or a husband and wife over in the bathroom in the morning, there are still benefits, aren't there, of actually having, even if you want to be small and agile, writing an agenda down so that you're not only discussing one topic of the day and forgetting these other things that are actually really important to the business as well. So, considering what are the risks that are going on in the business, are we compliant with all the laws that we need to be compliant with? They're just things that are really useful to keep on track. On that basis, how valuable is it for every business to have some form of documentation around their governance? Some notes from the minutes of the meetings that they're taking. So a written plan, write a plan on a page or something, even draw a diagram of where you want to take it.
I think some things are essential, regardless of the size. Some things are essential. Clearly, from a legal perspective, any resolutions you make, where we are going to commit to this, or we've entered into a contract over here, we've resolved as a business that this is something we're going to do, there needs to be a paper trail around that.
Yes.
No question. And small business New Zealand is often very, very poor at that. They're not keeping a company minute book. And like, I'm the only director, I'm 99% shareholder, why would I need to keep minutes? Might be handy in the legal situation in the future,
Yes.
So the resolutions, the minute keeping stuff, I think is critical anyway, of key decisions. I think an agenda is always a useful tool. I think an agenda is a useful tool whether we're talking governance or whether we're talking, just an advisor going out having a meeting with a client. If you don't put some clear expectations down about what you're going to achieve in the time that you're allocated to this job, there's a jolly good chance that A, you're not going to achieve everything you set out to do, and that you're going to accomplish a heck of a lot of things that neither of you really wanted to do. You're going to spend a lot of time on a lot of stuff that you shouldn't.
Yes.
And if we think back to management 101, so it's not governance, management. Management 101 is about efficient allocation of resources. End of story, right? How do we efficiently allocate our time, our effort, our energy, our capital, our whatever?
Yes.
And an agenda is one of the most useful tools that you can have for doing that.
Right.
So I would go every single time. You're working with an advisory board or with a coach or with some mentors, or you're starting to head down the path of actually having a governance structure that's more formalised. An agenda would be a critical thing. Yep.
Absolutely. Sure. I just confirmed some stats this morning from Stats New Zealand, February 2023. We have 605,000 enterprises in New Zealand, which is more than one for every 10 people in the country. 94% of them have 10 or fewer employees.
Yep.
What's even more interesting is that 73% of them have no employees.
Yep.
So they're the sole director businesses that you talked about before,
Yep.
one or two directors with nobody actually being paid a salary.
Of course, often we're all of those. I'd be an example of that. I have three businesses, or three companies that I'm a director of. In fact, there's four. Anyway, I always nearly forget
one of them.
Always nearly forget one. But one of them is deliberately structured as it has zero staff, it has zero anything, 100% me, yada yada yada. Good business reasons for that. Out at the other end, I'm one of 5 directors on a board that all have interests in the business, and it's sizable, and it's got a lot of responsibilities to a lot of stakeholders, and it's a very, very different governance overlay.
Yes.
So you can have X number of business owners in the country that actually have 2 or 3 or 4 of these things, and that's not counting the ones that have got specific purpose companies that they're going to wind up at the end of a particular project, which is frequently the case in construction likes, right? So they have special purpose companies that are only there for that job.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, coming back to this concept of governance, let's take one of those small businesses where maybe you've got the director or a couple of managing staff, whether it be your sole director or your husband and wife team, a couple of independents, advisors that are in there on the board. How frequently should they get together and have board meetings?
Yeah, I generally would suggest around every 6 weeks or so, which over the course of a typical working year means they're going to get together 7 or 8 times.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that you've got to be mindful of as you're evolving a business and you're starting to formalise the governance structure is that you've got to give time for the owner-operator, the executive director, to actually implement.
Yes.
Yeah, and then reassess. So you need to have enough time in between those get-togethers for them to execute, which is part of the creating accountability.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so having a firm agenda around those 6 meetings so that they can sit down and robustly talk about how the business is doing, how the business is expecting to do, what could go wrong in the business, and making sure that everything's okay, and then checking that the strategy is on track. You don't want to have it so frequently that the managing director is always preparing information for those other 2 people in terms of its reporting to the board. You want to keep the board reporting simple and effective, but you don't want it to be sort of every 3 months so that you're only getting that guide on an infrequent basis.
Yeah.
Once you start getting an independent voice.
But you keep a lot of the communication relatively informal too.
Yes.
So the in-between meetings, there is still a fairly high communication level, frequently via email, I guess, but where they're interacting on particular issues and things, and there's a bit of guidance and a bit of shaping happening along the way, which is a fabulous substitute for the formality of preparing a report in advance that they get to read before the meeting and so on. Yeah. And I think that's a very practical and workable solution for most small businesses that are evolving. You do need to make those decisions on the fly. They are embedded in the business, and more often than not are actually the prime revenue generators as well. So, there's a lot of pressure on them to use their time well.
So a good mix of informal contact, whether that be by email or catching up for a coffee once a week or once a fortnight, and then having the kind of the more formal lay every 6 weeks. And in that time frame, a lot of the reporting that the managing director should be preparing would be things that they should be looking at themselves about how the business is going anyway, right?
They should, but there's no pressure on them to do so if nobody's watching,
it's
right?
Accountability point again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like we often hear people talking in business about their business KPIs, and the reality is in a lot of small businesses that don't have any governance overlay whatsoever, they review their KPIs once a year, maybe when they're sitting down thinking about doing the token business plan for the next year again. So there's no real emphasis upon, what are the key metrics here and the key levers I should be pulling to make this business move forward. So stuff slides.
And that's another benefit of the accountability, is actually making sure that the people who own the business are watching the numbers, watching how the business is going.
And when we say watching the numbers, one of the great benefits I think of good governance in a smaller business is that the governance starts to help grow the business in ways beyond just financial performance. Good numbers include maybe staff satisfaction, customer satisfaction. It includes whether or not you're passing your compliance checks, and there's a whole bunch of measures that you can be looking at about whether or not the business is progressing well, and whether it's developing into something far more valuable that are not just about financial performance.
And also not things that have to be costly or time consuming to prepare.
Correct.
It's great. Okay, well, one final question for you then, Tony. What is the best governance advice you've received in your career?
Probably two. The first one was, it's not about you. And I think when we are moving into a space of either having external people looking into our business, which is a little bit uncomfortable, and having a say in what we should be doing about that business, which is even more uncomfortable, you've got to park your ego. You just have to. If you're coming in as a director or a consultant or an advisory board member, you definitely have to park your ego.
Right.
So number one is it's not about you, it's about the entity and the stakeholders, right? And probably another great piece of advice that I was given that's I still work to. You're moving into working in a team environment. You have to understand that you're in a team environment. It's no longer about the individuals and their individual interests, which means you've got to buy into the collective responsibility. You've got to buy into it. You cannot have people as advisors to your business and then have public disagreements about who said what and how things are supposed to work, and collect. Even if occasionally I've been the only wrong person in the room. Happens. Occasionally I've been the only right person in the room. That's happened even more rarely. But you will find yourself having robust debates and discussions about what is the right way forward and what are the considerations and so on and so on any particular thing. And whatever the process is you go through to reach the most right decision, you've just got to support it.
Yes.
You have to. Whether you were arguing passionately against it for the last 4 hours or not, it's like, okay, decision done, that's what we're going as a team. You've got to remember you're in a team environment now. It's a massive thing.
Yeah, both really great pieces. The first one you were saying, and not about you, it enables you to keep in mind that it's always the ideas that are being challenged. It's not the individual that's being challenged. It's you've put the ideas out there, they might get taken down, that's okay. And as part of that team environment, if you set up a structure where whatever decisions you make, you want to measure the outcomes, and if that's the normal way to go, it's okay to be disagreed with. It's okay to make a decision that you don't agree with, and if you measure it and it turns out that you were wrong, well, just as well you had a team to make a decision.
Make a new decision.
If it turns out you were right, well, you can switch and
make a new decision. It was like realistically in both. And I'm pulling a number out of the air, but hey, if I get 51% of the decisions right every day, we're making progress, right?
Absolutely.
The 49% that are wrong. make a new decision.
And it's about having someone that's going to challenge you as well, right? So if you're in a room of people where everyone's agreeing all the time, well, maybe you haven't got the right people in the boardroom.
Oh, you definitely don't have the right people in the boardroom. You definitely don't. There should be challenging. There should be. And depersonalised. It's not personal challenge at all. It's, challenging the concept, challenging the thinking, challenging whether or not this is the optimal way to do something. That's where the best ideas come from.
Absolutely.
Dead.
CV, thank you. That's
Welcome.
been a great, fun conversation. I look forward to catching up again really soon. And I'll see you next episode.